A quick thank you to the T5 peeps. Bob the Dragon, Data Magnet, Cat Crab Lobster, Duck Machine, Try Again 95, Astray the Dreamer, Mesic, Budic Joel, German Chemist, Casper Arnholtz, and Chaos to Must. Thank you very much. On to the story. Class 10 Species Offender Part 1. It hadn't been an unusual day aboard the rehabilitation segment of the Dragzoon station. A few new species members had arrived to be rehabilitated in accordance with Union law, and all was routine. That is to say, it was routine until the message arrived. Union priority channel to Dragzoon station. Rehabilitation. Prepare to receive a Class 10 species offender. The supervisors of the rehabilitation segment had all needed to read and reread the message before taking action. Within minutes, the rehabilitation segment was buzzing with the word of an impending arrival, both the guardians and the offenders being rehabilitated. There could be no doubts as to the contents of the message, but along with the buzz came a chill that seemed to fill the whole rehabilitation segment and seemed even to spread outwards into the station beyond. Union law was very clear on how rehabilitation was conducted. Offenders, regardless of their species, were subjected to what Union outsiders condemned as effectively torture. The Union didn't care. It was viewed as far more effective and universal than attempting to correct built-in sociopathic and perhaps psychopathic behaviors that the various members of species were bound to develop over the course of the social developments in mixed societies. The rehabilitation segments of the various stations throughout the Union were a necessary combatant in order to protect the larger population, and the Dragzoon station segment was no exception. But the Dragzoon station rehabilitation segment was also older, built from scrapped vessels, and so was more heavily reinforced than the average rehabilitation segment. The long, singular passage that connected the Dragzoon station was kept sealed by a void of space, and was long enough that even the most hardy Union species wouldn't be able to cross it without inflicting lethal damage upon themselves, to the point that without medical aid from the best species doctors on the other end, they would assuredly perish. And yet still a hushed whisper of a Class 10 species offender arriving moved like tachyons, utterly permeating the station and cloaking it in an almost nervous sense of fear. Union species weren't pacifists, nor were they warriors. They simply did what was necessary, but this was something new. There were no Class 10 species with the Union, and the few that had reached the Union's ears were either from far enough away that the Union didn't bother to care, or were too primitive to bother engaging. It seemed like it must be a joke. The lead supervisor of the rehabilitation requested clarification from the station master, who seemed to blanch at seeing the message and took a few moments before confirming that it was in fact genuine. This made the lead supervisor blanch as life fluid drained inwardly from their appendages. Quickly, the lead supervisor began personally overseeing the readying and rehabilitation chamber for the Class 10 species offender. It seemed impossible without knowing what kind of being this was or what offense they had committed. The equipment that could be found was barely rated for Class 8 species offenders, and thanks to the makers, there were few of those. The handling of a Class 10 seemed impossible. The regulations called for the use of gravitational therapy, restraints, chemical protectives, ingestible poisons in quantities that would kill most species outright. High and low thermal controls that could kill half the Union species just by being online for more than a few minutes. And the walls of the chamber itself was almost woefully inadequate. The regulations called for the walls to be capable of sustaining pressure of 10 detras in an intermittent point pressures in excess of 300 detras. To even imagine a being capable of such pressures scared some of the guardians viscerally, to the point that two needed to discontinue and seek medical treatment. The siren sounded as the lead supervisor began to run through the list again. The offender had arrived, and the connecting tube was being filled with breathable atmosphere. The lead supervisor did their best to confirm that the chamber was as ready as it could be under the circumstances, and then moved to the receiving port, trying to look as professional as they should when receiving any offender. When receiving port opened, a short being, garbed in the offender's wear, and ensconced with more heavy restraints than the supervisor might have guessed a being could easily withstand, shuffled through, followed closely by what seemed to be 2 special dragoons, evidenced by the Union Class 5 power armor and bonded heavy weaponry, which the lead supervisor noticed was on line and being aimed at the offender. The lead supervisor wanted to run. Just being on the other side of the offender was dangerous. Those bonded heavy weapons could undoubtedly destroy this offender and then destroy the lead supervisor. But the lead supervisor had to remind himself, this was a Class 10 species offender. That meant that this being was so dangerous to Union citizens that even the most basic of precautions would mean nothing to it. The lead supervisor looked at the offender and found it looking at the lead supervisor. The runes upon the heavy restraints blazed with danger warnings of this being. The binocular vision of the offender seemed to fill the lead supervisor's awareness. "Hello there, do you have my room ready?" The offender asked in Union Standard, an almost undeniable hint of joy in their voice. The lead supervisor took a moment to register this before snapping back into the standard procedure. "I am the lead supervisor here, and you will speak only when directed to, offender," the lead supervisor mustered. This appeared to amuse the offender, but the lead supervisor refused to be baited. Offenders were to be rehabilitated, nothing more, nothing less. "Crime?" the lead supervisor asked the dragoons. "Destruction of property, possession of chemical weaponry, involuntary murder of Union citizens," one of the dragoons recited. "I keep telling you that it's not my fault that idiot customs agent opened my bags in public," the offender bemoaned. "Silence!" shouted one of the nearby junior supervisors, who raised a correctional prod in threat. "Only if you guys quit it with the tickle rods. It was funny the first time, but this is ridiculous," the offender mumbled. The lead supervisor waved the junior supervisor back down. Based on that statement alone, it sounded like the offender was capable of shrugging off the correctional prods. This would be a problem in holding their offender if this offender became a bigger problem. "Name, species, world of origin, and alliance information," the lead supervisor asked, pointedly looking at the offender. "Wilfred von Vonnegut. Human or Terran, depending on what your union calls us. I'm a spacer, so I don't have a world of origin, but I'm out of the Terran collective," the offender said, shrugging, which the lead supervisor found to be a remarkable effort, considering his heavy restraints. If only for a moment, the lead supervisor swore they heard the heavy restraints creak. It seemed impossible. The poly chains that formed the heavy restraints were flexible enough to fit enough species, but shouldn't be capable of being easily deformed, except by tools specifically designed for such deformations. "Dragoons, due to the nature of the offender, please assist us in escorting the offender to the chamber," the lead supervisor managed, their thoughts being filled with the possibilities of what might happen if this, human got loose outside of their chamber. The dragoons nodded as one, and the small procession began through the corridors to the isolated space where the Class 10 species chamber had been hastily finished. "Hey, this looks more like a home than most of our Union standard places," the human said. The human stepped into the chamber without any apparent argument, and the lead supervisor sealed the chamber entrance with their personal control key, before remembering the heavy restraints. "Offender, you will need to make yourself available in order for us to remove the heavy restraints," the lead supervisor said. The human looked at the lead supervisor and down at the restraints. Then they seemed to grunt for a moment and bent themselves slightly. With ease, the human then removed the deformed heavy restraints. "I'm all right. Can I put a wake-up call in for about 4 cycles from now? I could use a nap." "Oh, you stocked it with salsa. Any chance I can get some chips?" the human asked, very congenially. The lead supervisor could only turn away and wonder what had been brought to their rehabilitation segment. The dragoons audibly followed behind, and then swiftly departed. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed